this is a redo. So if any of you got my first version of this lecture, I apologize for the technical difficulties. Those of you that didn't experience my technical difficulties, you're welcome. And here is a improved version. So what we're going to do today, we're going to really do two things. We're going to explore an important model of engagement in the literacy classroom, the workshop model, and then we're going to connect that and help you to kind of understand what we're doing with the literature circles assignment in this class, which I know is not going to be a full literature circle, but at least it gives you some exposure and hopefully enhances your understanding so that you feel like this is a strategy that you might consider using in your own classroom. One of the things I want to start this with is it's really part of what this work comes out of is an understanding that we need to improve. We need to up the game in terms of helping our students to become improved readers. And like anything, reading is a skill. And if they're not practicing it, they're not developing that skill. One really disturbing statistic is that the average student in high school reads less than 15 minutes a day. I want you to think about that. More than half of our students read less than 15 minutes a day. And that is after a full 8-hour school day, where they've gone to 8 or 9 class periods. And so what that tells us is we've kind of developed this habit as content area teachers. We've kind of reading proofed our classroom, and we have to think about what are some of the practices that we do. Do we lecture in PowerPoint and kind of hand our students the information and not ask them to read it? And if we do that, are we actually benefiting our students? Because what we know is that students who are frequent readers perform better. The more that the older the students get, the more that frequent practice can impact their achievement. So that by the time our students are 17, there's actually a 30-point difference between frequent readers and infrequent readers on their performance in the NAEP reading scores. So that tells us that it is critical. As we are decreasing the amount of reading that students are doing and PowerPointing them, giving them through slides and lectures and mini lessons, the content that they maybe should be reading, we're actually then contributing to decreasing their achievement. And one of the things that we know is that students who become personally invested and have and feel like their learning is personalized, and reading would be one of those, actually achieve more, read more, and that they do better. So we want to think about how we can personalize the reading experience, how we can increase the amount of reading that they do, but also how we can personalize the reading experience so we can set our students up for success. And we should know that we're setting them up for success, not just in reading, but in all the content areas. Students who scored in the top tercile, the top third of reading achievement, also performed answered 70% more right answers in math and science questions. Okay, so what that tells us is skilled readers don't just mean that they're skilled. We're not just teaching them reading to have them perform better in their English classrooms. They're going to perform better in our own classrooms. Why? Because we know that reading, that we learn through reading, also that reading is a skill that helps our students to pay attention, attend to facts and details. So one way that has become extremely popular, it is done in the lower grades as well, but one way that secondary teachers have really worked to up their reading game in their classrooms is by introducing what we call the reading workshop model. What is it? It's a model of instruction that focuses on the work of the reader. Teachers model and then directly teach the skills and strategies that proficient students read. So a reading workshop lesson has 4 components. A 10 to 15 minute mini lesson that the teacher will do, where they model a skill or a strategy. Time for the students immediately to engage in reading, so independent reading time. Conferencing and strategy focusing during that independent reading time. So you're going to go in and you're going to talk to students. You're going to see if they're able to apply the skill that you modeled. And then a closing activity, which is often group related. We know that our students are very social, right? We're dealing with adolescents. So it's very useful if we can kind of harness the power of the peers. Okay, I'm going to stop for just a second so that I can change the screen so that I am sharing my sound with you. Okay, but what I'm going to show you here is an example of a Think Aloud in a history classroom. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but what I want to show you is how this teacher in fact engages in explicitly showing his students the strategies that he uses before reading a historical document.
We're going to be looking at a passage, and I'm going to be looking at how authors use information to make a piece of history real. What type of sources they use, how do they create authenticity. One of the ways they do it is by giving actual accounts of people that lived during what happened in history. So I'm going to show you how I will read a passage and look for that, and then toward the end of class, we'll get into small groups, and you all can then practice seeing how an author uses different ways or devices to make a piece of history more real. So I'm thinking already the reading's going to be something about we've been studying here in class. So let me get started. The first thing I do as a reader when I look at something, and you all can look on because you all have this in front of you, is I don't dive right in. I look at the whole reading as a whole, okay? And almost the first thing that draws my attention is the picture. And I look at, what do I see in the picture? I see ladies at work. It doesn't look like, this time period. It probably looks like the time period we're studying, the early 1900s. I can also read the caption. This picture shows little of the frantic activity of a sweatshop. Often workers put in long hours in dimly lit factories. So that gives me a clue. Okay, it looks like these women are probably working long hours. They're working in a factory. Let me now go to the headings. Starting at the top, the main heading is Workers Strike at the Triangle Company. Let me look at the subheadings. The first one is...
Okay, so in this particular situation, he's showing his students how he's approaching this from a historical lens, right? What are the things that as a history teacher he might look at? In the science classroom, you might direct a student's attention to looking at a graph. You might have them look at an infographic, things like that. So what you focus in on the mini lesson is going to really be something that is important to your content.
We're going to be looking at a passage, and
then I'll move on here. But then after you've done this mini lesson where you've kind of demonstrated a skill, you then move into the independent reading time. And some of the things that you might think about, because we are working with adolescents, is could you maybe consider offering choices to allow motivation and also to improve cultural competence? So let students pick and maybe find some articles that are intentionally more inclusive, right? Either by author or content. You might think about the fact we often think of reading workshop as a way to do a whole novel or a whole book. That doesn't have to be that way. You could do a reading workshop frequently in a one-off. They could read an article. You can collect articles about topics, and you could use that as a reading workshop for reading workshop. And really think about the strategy that you want them to focus on in that Think Aloud. And when you give them independent reading time, ask them to apply that strategy. Because while they are reading, you're going to go around, and this is an example of a checklist that a teacher wrote. It was in Teacher Tape Teachers, I think. But you're going to complete check-ins, and you're going to ask questions of your students, and you're going to be able to identify who's having problems with that strategy, who's having problems with that skill. And you'll be able to do one-on-one conferencing. You might not get through the whole class, which is why something like this would be very useful, because you could know where you left off. You could know who was really struggling, so the next day you can go back to them. But it allows for these kind of check-ins with your students. Then the last part is where the literature circles could grow. You want to have a closing activity, a class discussion. It could be a whole class discussion. It could be a small group discussion. But one way that you might close out could be in literature circles, which is something that you're going to be doing in this class in a we're not going to be able to have the full literature circles because of the nature of an asynchronous online class, but you're going to be delving into the assigned roles and getting familiar with the different roles that the students might be able to take on. But what happens in a literature circle, and this could be something they could do during their independent reading and bring to the group, or they could do it as homework and come back. So if it's a longer reading, you might have them actually do this at home as homework, do the reading, and then come into their literature circles. But they have assigned roles. The group will select the text and they meet after reading to discuss the reading. Okay. This is a great closing activity. It's the time of the class where you're going to be most likely to lose the students. If you put them into groups, you can see the interaction. And I'm just going to show you a couple of clips, but in this clip, you're going to see this girl here is actually what I'm assuming she's the wordsmith, which means that her assigned role in the literature circle was to find and present new and important vocabulary to the group. As we watch this, I want you to notice the agency. I want you to notice the interest and the sort of how they take charge of their own reading instruction here.
Do you guys know what a cloakroom means?
A cloakroom? I know what a cloak is, but not a cloakroom.
Okay,
Is it like where they
where they
keep all their their jackets?
Are they like jackets or
like a space
yeah,
where
like
you put their
a
jackets?
room full of people for them to like hang their coats.
Oh yeah, I said it first.
Who cares?
Do you guys know what a grist mill is?
No, what
my
are you
God.
like?
I
It's
never
very
even heard of it.
similar to.
Is that even how you spell it?
Yeah.
Do you happen to know how you memorize?
Okay, I'll stop there, but I want you to notice how they were talking about the word, they were asking questions about the word, they were making connections about the word. And it's hard to imagine that they would have been that invested in vocabulary instruction that was coming from the teacher, but because it was coming from a peer, we saw that. And so I want you to think about whether or not literature circles are something that you might consider using in your content area class.
Do you guys know what a cloakroom means?
All right. Okay. So what are we going to be doing in this class? Hopefully at this point you've gotten the directions. I did send an email out. You're going to be working within the various roles in the literature circles to understand the different responsibilities. So you're going to work, you're going to be able to choose and create the work product that the student in the literature circle would need to bring in order for that literature circle that you saw in that short clip that I showed you, for that to come alive. So you're going to work with the various roles and consider how that could work in your disciplinary literacy classroom. So I'm going to stop this here and wish you a good luck, and hope that you guys have a nice rest of the week.